Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nature Patch. Today's video is going to be something a little bit different, still kind of garden related, and I'll get into that throughout this video. But I wanted to sit down with you all. I have a cup of tea, as usual, and I wanted to just chat about my experience doing a PhD in Australia and share with you what it is, what my thoughts are, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and just kind of just share some of my research findings with you all, because I really think that it's important that research that scientists do is made available to the public and is really easily accessible. So I thought I would just kind of give a little bit of a wrap up of what my PhD was all about. And then also I've got some questions here that I asked on Instagram and YouTube, just basically if you had any questions for me about a PhD, and I have a few, so I'll go through those as well. I tend to kind of ramble a little bit, so I'm hoping this video isn't going to be too long, but I definitely suggest grabbing a cup of tea or coffee for this one. But I will try and put timestamps on this video, so if you're really interested in a particular part of this video, you can skip forward to that. I've got a little bit of Christmas behind me because we have started decorating and I love Christmas. It's also coming to the time where I'm wrapping up my thesis and my entire project, which is so crazy that this time has gone really quickly, and there was lots of hurdles thrown in that I'll briefly discuss what they were. But for anyone who isn't sure about what a PhD is, I'll go over what it is and how it kind of works in Australia. So a PhD is a Doctor of Philosophy. It pretty much means that you are an expert in your field of knowledge that you choose. It's one of the highest kind of levels of research in academia, and it's really a stepping stone in academia, particularly if you are interested in doing research full-time at a university. Getting a PhD is really your ticket into that world. How it works in Australia is you are given a salary, so you need to apply for a certain project that people put together with grants, or if you're lucky enough, you can apply for your own research project and make it up yourself, and then apply for different grants, and the government gives you a stipend, which is not a lot of money, but you do treat it like a job. So yeah, you do get a regular income, which is great. They usually last about 3.5 years to 4 years. I'm coming up to the 4-year mark, so kind of the later stage of how long you want to be doing a PhD for, just in terms of your salary that's provided. It is pretty much capped at the 4-year mark. And what you do at the start is you apply, and if you have the correct qualifications and experience, you usually get accepted. And then you start your team, which is comprised of yourself and usually about 2 to 3 supervisors, is what I have seen most people have. I was an exception and had 4 supervisors, which is a lot to handle, but it's really up to you how many you want. The more you have, just the more organization skills you need to manage everyone on your team. And the expectations, it really depends on the different university that you go to. For the one that I went to, I needed to do a few different courses as a part of my PhD, and meet certain milestones every year. So usually you'll have a confirmation milestone where you need to be confirmed your candidature, which basically means a team of people just sit around and listen to your research and check whether you're on the right track or not. And then you have a few different milestones throughout just for a team of people to double check that you're on the right track, and that you're completing all of the research that you need to. So everyone's research project is completely different. There are so many different fields of research that you can do a PhD in. I chose to do mine in the field of environmental science, kind of more like environmental management and focused on mining. So I have a big fascination with the impact of mines, particularly here in Australia. I did a little bit of research before my PhD up on Groote Island, working on a manganese mine, where I got an amazing opportunity to work with the Indigenous community up there, the Anandilliyakwa people, where we put together all of these different programs to monitor weeds on site. doesn't sound too interesting, but it really was a great time. And that kind of sparked my interest of the impact that mining has, not only just on the physical environment, but also how people are impacted through a change in the physical environment. And this is something I've always been super interested in. I have a background in geography. I love everything environment, learning about the impact of land use change and mining in particular. So it was a really great field for me to be in and continue that throughout my PhD. I started actually working on a completely different project, which took up a lot of time. It was about 6 months of work that I did into my PhD. And then one of my supervisors moved away, and unfortunately I had to switch projects, which at the time I was really bummed about, but the project that I then hopped onto was 100 times better, and I was super glad that change had happened. Originally, I was working in the labs looking at tailings, which is one of the waste products of mining that is really high in pH, chemicals, and is really difficult to grow things in. So I was looking at whether we could change those tailings into something a little bit more productive to manage waste production on mine sites. I did a complete 180 after switching my projects, and now my project is all based on something called ecosystem services, which is the benefits that we receive from nature. Humans have always had a connection with the natural world, and we still depend on it every single day. We depend on it for clean air, for fresh water, but also some of the more intangible things like our mental enjoyment by going on things like bushwalks or doing things like bird watching. So I was really interested in how this really destructive process of mining ore and taking ore out of the ground, how that impacts both biodiversity, but also the benefits that are contained within woodland forests, particularly in Northern Australia. I have a real interest in learning about Indigenous communities and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture in Australia. I find it really, really interesting and something so special that I'm really thankful that we have such amazing history in our country. In terms of some of the expectations of my work, I was expected to produce research chapters, which you can do a thesis in a few different ways, but I chose to do my thesis in a way which is called chapter by publication or thesis by publication, which means that each of my chapters of my thesis were going to be and are going to be a published journal article piece. So all up, I have 6 chapters in my thesis. The first and the last are the introduction and the discussion chapters. So I'm just working on my discussion chapter at the moment, but I have 4 main bodies of research which have kind of 4 overarching findings that I'll let you know what they are today. I'm also just going to discuss a few other things, and I've got my laptop here so I don't forget anything, but I want to go over just some of the field work that I did, how I collected my data, and then I'll kind of discuss my overall findings as well, which I might actually do that first to kind of give you a little bit of context and give you a very short spiel of my project, which is one of the hardest things I find as a PhD student when people ask you what you do, because for a lot of my thesis I have had no idea how to put that into one sentence because there is just so much that I was trying to do with this project. But essentially what I was trying to do, I have a study site up in Northern Australia, around in Northern Queensland. I'm not going to name names or name sites or anything like that, but if you're interested, it's not that hard to figure out. I work around, not for, one of the largest mining companies that has had a lot of headlines in the news lately. I'll just leave it at that. But the ore body that I work around different mining sites at is bauxite, which is used in aluminium production. Australia has some of the largest bauxite deposits in the world. And here in Australia, we also have some of the largest deposits of many other different ores. So it is a massive, massive field of research, the impact of mining, that I think personally needs a lot more people invested in and doing more research. So it's great for me because I could really go wherever I wanted with these questions because it is such a new field of research. So firstly, one of my overall findings when I'm looking at what is the impact of mining on this thing called ecosystem services, I chose to do a literature review, which is now published in a journal, and you do need certain access to be able to read it, but if you would like a copy, just let me know and I can send one through. What this was a literature review of all of the literature on mining and ecosystem services. And what I found from that wasn't really surprised, but there's just not a lot of research on it. There's a lot of research on the impact that mining has on the physical environment, like biodiversity, and also cultural heritage. But then there's kind of a gray area where research is missing around ecosystem services and how people's well-being is impacted by mining. So I found there was different positive and negative impacts of mining on ecosystem services. And this really was dependent on the stage of mining. So at the very beginning, when you have kind of the exploration stages and the initial clearing of vegetation, this is usually for open cut mines, I should say, so not underground. You have a lot of land clearing, and that can take away a lot of value that people place on a part of land. But then there's also positive benefits of mining in terms of facilitating a lot more access to different areas that people may desire to visit through increased roads and rail and things like that. And there's also a lot of positive benefits that can come at the very end of mining, particularly if the environment was degraded in the first place in the stage of rehabilitation, which is a really great opportunity for mining companies to take what the community would like and make it into something that has benefit, if not more benefit, that was there in the first place. But basically from that review, I found that it was not a very detailed field of research. So that was great to line my thesis up because I could start to develop even more research questions throughout my thesis. And that kind of answered my first question, I suppose, which was what are the links between mining and ecosystem services? The next chapter that I put together was identifying the existing connections between people and nature and what ecosystem services were most valued in my study site. So I looked at this from an Indigenous perspective because around my study region, a lot of the area has native title and traditional owners have a say of what happens on the land. So it's really important to have conversations with community about what really is impacting them most about this mining development and clearing land. How does this actually impact an individual in terms of their happiness and overall well-being, both physical and mental as well? This is kind of where gardening comes into it because gardening for me is such an important thing for my mental health. So I kind of make that comparison with a lot of the mining operations that go on up north, in that people have such a strong connection to the land, particularly traditional owners who consider the entire land of their traditional homelands to be their home and their connection to. So taking that away, not only just all of the plants and animals, but also the access can have a real big impact on people. What I found with this study was that some of the most valuable things about nature was things like bush foods and fresh water, which were the most valuable tangible things about the landscape. Intangible, Things like sharing of knowledge and being able to participate in recreation on the grounds were the two most intangible things. So understanding that is really critical to then having a mining operation come in and really disrupt those four kind of main valuable things that really contribute to people's well-being and hold people together. And we did that through developing our own method alongside the community, where we put together all of these different cards which represented things that people value. We used photos, had interpreters up there, because a lot of Indigenous communities, English is not their first language, it's often their second and third language. So all of that was factored into our methods. We overall found that this was just so important for research. It's another gap in research that a lot of researchers will take their frameworks and existing kind of thoughts and structures, bring it into a community, and it just doesn't work. So we flipped it around and kind of and developed our methods alongside people, which was so much more worthwhile, both for the researcher and everyone who was participating in my kind of facilitated group discussions that we had. So my next chapter was all about mapping the landscape, and again, I'm not going to name names or show you graphs and things like that. But basically what I was trying to do was understand how much was being removed in terms of these things like bush foods, traditional medicine, plants, and plants that had cultural significance. So this took a lot of work and a lot of field work of going out with traditional owners on country and identifying different plants that had cultural significance, whether you could eat them. I had a lot of delicious bush tucker up north, and also whether they were a medicine plant, whether it was related to someone's totem and someone's really strong connection to country, or whether you could use it for art, for making dyes or different arts and crafts that have traditional value. And what we found from this was that there was a lot of species that aren't being protected by mining. There's a lot of different ways to protect land under biodiversity and cultural heritage, with ecosystem services and plants. We found the highest number of these plants were located in woodlands that don't have as much biodiversity value or cultural heritage, so they're not protected at all. We also found that they're not really considered at all in mining reports, which was the next finding. So there wasn't really a lot of hope for these really important cultural plants, particularly if they're not included in the post-mining stage or the rehabilitation of the land. That's another story that is then going to feed into future work and future projects, but that is a real wrap up of some of my research findings. There's not a lot of research. We found talking to community and developing our research alongside traditional owners was absolutely critical. We unfortunately found that a lot of parts of nature that are really valuable to people's well-being aren't protected, and there's no opportunity to evaluate these in impact assessment under current policy in Australia and management plans. Right, I'm having to constantly readjust this new camera that I'm filming on, so the background may look a little different every now and then. I've also got lots of cats running around being naughty as well. So now I thought I would chat a little bit about what I enjoyed so far about doing my PhD and what I didn't quite enjoy. And this might give you a little bit of context if you are starting out, or maybe just might be a little bit relatable if you are doing your PhD. I forgot to mention that I'm about a month or so out from getting ready to submit my thesis. So yeah, it's getting very close to the end date, which I'm very happy about. One of the things that I really enjoyed about my project was the field work that I got to do. It's probably number one for me. I met some amazing people and had some amazing life experiences that definitely changed who I am today. So I might put a few photos up on the screen of some of the areas that I did fieldwork in. It was honestly some of the most beautiful parts of Australia that I got to work in. Fieldwork is a mixture of emotions. It is super hard and tiring, particularly working on mine sites like I was doing. Very early starts and very late endings to the day. And for me, I wasn't used to doing that much physical activity. Going from doing literature reviews on my little laptop to planting thousands of trees and being involved in the community and meeting new people every day was very different for an introverted person like myself. But I got to meet some amazing researchers. I was a part of a really big group of researchers doing different projects up there on a particular mine site. Some of the things that we did that wasn't directly related to my research, but I was still involved, was before mining, we cut down entire trees and weighed entire trees, which is very, very sad to see a tree fall and be gone, particularly really old, large trees. But this is a part of research that we measure biomass of different areas, and to do that you weigh an entire tree, you cut it all up, leaves, roots and everything, rip it out of the ground and weigh it, and then you can start to get an idea of the biomass of a certain area. And this is important to know pre-mining before you mine an area, so that you can make sure if you want that as a standard, you can return that post-mining. Some of the other things, I was involved in a lot of seed trials, so mixing together a lot of different native seeds for post-mining and rehabilitation sites. Also testing out different amendments. So again, coming back to the gardening, just on a really large scale of how to deal with the degraded landscape. We were applying lots of different fertilizers and biochar to create a better environment for plants to grow. And we planted rows and rows of trees to see how they do in a post-mining landscape. And I also got to do a lot of walks and just being out in the bush with traditional owners, looking at different bush food plants, tasting different delicious native bush tucker that we have here in Australia, and just learning about different people's connection to nature and to the land was just, at a spiritual level, really important for me to be able to see that and learn about our really rich cultural history. I also have a lot of stories to tell regarding crocodiles and large animals that I got myself into kind of sticky situations that I'm not sure how much I'll share of that on the internet publicly, but let's just say that my heart rate a lot of the times in field work went skyrocketing, being out in the Australian landscape in the middle of nowhere when you come across very dangerous animals is terrifying, and having decisions of whether to run towards into the bush where snakes and spiders and bulls are, or out into the ocean where crocodiles and jellyfish are, is just a really stressful situation. Nonetheless, really amazing experiences, and I actually really enjoyed being able to go to work every day having to look out for crocodiles and see amazing animals around me. And I also made some amazing connections with different traditional owners and was invited out to go camping on country, which was one of the most special experiences of my life. Listening to stories and learning history that has been around for tens of thousands of years was one of the most special things I have ever done in my life. And I will always remember sleeping in my tent, looking up at the night sky and the stars, and waking up right across from the ocean that everyone around me had connections and had been on that land for thousands and thousands of years. Some of the things that I didn't really enjoy about this whole PhD process is I'm a very introverted person, and a lot of the time the research world calls for you to share your research, be extroverted and go to certain networking events and conferences and talks. of which I did my fair share, but I just really didn't enjoy it. And I needed to do those things to find that out, because I had never really presented at conferences before, or made posters, or have people ask me about my work. And putting myself out there is really difficult. It's definitely a lot easier doing it on YouTube because I'm just kind of talking to a camera with my cats around. But having hundreds of people watch you speaking is just not my cup of tea. I also didn't love the process of publishing papers, which was my first chapter was published in a scientific journal. I just found it really, really challenging and didn't have the greatest experience with my reviewers reviewing my work. So those were kind of the things that I didn't really enjoy. Also, the whole process of a PhD is a marathon, not a sprint. I know everyone says that, but it is so, so true. There's a few questions that I'm going to answer that a few people asked on YouTube and Instagram, just to kind of wrap this very, very long video up. But the first question was from Diane and Samson, and they asked, what was something surprising that you found through your research, or the most surprising thing, and something that you haven't been able to stop yourself from sharing to others? Probably the most surprising thing that I had was honestly just the world of researchers and the academic world, how kind of competitive some of it is, which, you know, I had a little inkling about, but I was really surprised at the pressure that is put on a lot of PhD students, particularly at the university that I'm at. I know it's very similar with a lot of other ones, but I did feel that pressure and was quite surprised that I would have to deal with that. Being a PhD candidate was the pressure of having to publish and get your name out there. It was really surprising to me, again, because I am a very introverted person. It took a lot to get used to having to just push my research out there and tell people about it, even though they weren't really asking a lot of the time. And then something that I can't help tell people about is all of my fieldwork adventures. I just have so many stories that I can do another video about and share my wonderful adventures up in northern Queensland, but that's definitely a happy part of my project that I do like to come back to and share all of the different photos that I take. I have actually an album on my phone of times of when I felt horrible, which sounds kind of weird, but you know, I did it for me to remind myself that it was so much hard work, all of this field work, but so worth it in the end. And now I have all of these beautiful photos of me covered in sweat and dirt and mine site stuff. So I'm definitely thankful that I have all of those pictures and memories to look back on and share stories about crocodiles and bulls and running away from snakes and that kind of thing. And then I had some other questions about rehabilitation. What do you do post-mining? How do you restore ecosystems? And also where the revegetation stock comes from. And let me say this, rehabilitating and restoring an ecosystem is possibly one of the hardest things that you can do, which makes the end stage of mining very interesting to me and something that I do like to think about a lot. To put it into perspective, I can kind of count on one or two hands of the number of mines that have successfully been rehabilitated and completely closed and handed back to different landowners. So there's a very small amount that have successfully undergone rehabilitation. And so it's something that's really hard to do. Usually the plants won't be planted as seedlings. They'll just use native seed stock with the hope and the expectation that a lot of other native plants will return if you're kind of creating a native environment, which from experience that is very difficult to do. There are a lot of wholesale nurseries and organizations, some of which are run by a lot of Indigenous groups that provide seedlings that you can use post-mining. So that is another option as well if you can't source native seeds. But often native seeds are sourced from around the area, usually collected by traditional owners from the site in which I was working at. So how to make post-mining as effective as possible? I could literally do multiple other PhDs on this topic. And if you're interested, it's a really up and coming field of research that definitely needs some more scientists and researchers invested in this question. From my personal experience, how to make it as most effective is by listening to the people and the community that are going to be dealing with the effects of post-mining. Understanding what the community may want, keeping in mind that some mines at a minimum are, 50 to 60 years, which is an entire generation gone. So often the people that are making decisions about what happens after the mine is ended aren't going to be the ones that are actually being impacted by post-mining. The best way to do rehabilitation is progressive rehabilitation, which is done as you mine, you slowly rehabilitate the areas that have been mined. I know this is very difficult to do for some companies who want to go back and remine certain areas, which is often done. And then the standard of rehab just isn't what it should be. There are definitely best practice guidelines to follow that are available for the public, but in my opinion, need a lot more work and a lot more research. But as long as you're listening to the people, because they may not even want a native self-sustaining vegetation community post-mining, they might want something different that provides benefit to the community. Another point that is really important to have effective rehabilitation post-mining is to set standards, which really needs a lot more emphasis on currently. To set standards before you start mining of what you want the area to look like post-mining, and have tangible, quantifiable numbers, as much information as you can, is really crucial to make sure that you actually get that post-mining. And then updating that every single year as the mine progresses and people change is really crucial to have a really good communication between all of the stakeholders of mining companies. That then can prevent some things that have recently happened by really understanding how people feel about their environment, what is important, is really crucial for mining companies to understand, because often mistakes can be made that you can never rehabilitate some of those mistakes. So in my opinion, pre-mining is crucial for post-mining, and having communication all throughout mining is important. So I'm very aware that this was a very lengthy video, but I hope you got something out of it, and this provides a little bit more information about what I do for a job. It really directly does relate to gardening in my opinion. I'm just doing planting and thinking about permaculture principles just on a multiple hectare scale in these post-mining areas. I'm someone who, I love a good challenge, and revegetating mine sites is a very good challenge. So it's something I'm super passionate about, and I try to not let all of kind of the darkness and all of the bad things that are happening in terms of mining get me down, because honestly, a lot of those thoughts just don't get you anywhere. A lot of this needs to be done through thorough research and actually having people committed to going out on site, planting things, talking to the community. That's really what needs to happen, and really identifying that connection that people have with nature is so crucial to making sure that mining doesn't take that away. And this goes for any other development. It's not just mining, any kind of land use change, all of this work is appropriate. But let me know what you thought about this video. Again, there will be lots more other garden videos, so don't worry if this wasn't your cup of tea, that is perfectly fine, but I had a lot of people asking, so I hope this was interesting to a lot of you who have been asking. And if you do have any questions, just let me know down in the comments, and I would be more than happy to chat a little bit more about my project. And I might do some more videos in future of some tips of how to kind of connect to nature a little bit more, which is what I try and do on my channel anyway, but directly how to relate that to stressful situations, which PhD life, very stressful. So I would love to incorporate how I used the garden to cope with all of that stress and anxiety build up throughout this project. But overall, it was such a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to what the future holds with all of this research that I've been able to achieve. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. The light is definitely going. I've been in and out filming this video all afternoon in the garden, making dinner, all of that stuff. So apologies if the light changed over the time of this video. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far, and until my next video, happy gardening everyone. Bye. What are you doing? Do you need to be involved? We're gonna need top down.